A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
It is Families Week, so a wonderful opportunity today to explore what sort of impacts our own family of origins brings to our parenting and relationship habits. We're going to be talking about the good habits and perhaps the bad habits. Well, there are all sorts of complex dynamics and experiences that we all bring from our early family life, early relationships, that influences the current ways that we behave in our relationships. So, what happened to us in our upbringing that shapes the way we think about parenting our own children? And what are we likely to be passing on to future generations, both good and bad? Or perhaps there's something to the biblical foundations of love, wisdom and faith that can supercharge our parenting and our relationships. Our special guests through this coming hour, Brett and Kate Ryan, they lead Focus on the Family in Australia, and families and relationships are right at the heart of what they do best. A special welcome along, first of all, to you, Kate. Welcome.
Thank you, Neil. Lovely to be here today.
And Brett, welcome to you.
Oh, thank you. I'm being mentioned. Kate's really the head.
We'll let you have a comment every now and then, whenever Kate wants to be quiet.
Neil, I appreciate that. We're really excited about being partnering with Vision for National Families Week, and it's not our baby. We often refer to the National Families Week is a government initiative, and they're promoting it. And so obviously we're going to leverage it, and because of our bias, if we're talking about families, we'll be there.
Well, families are your bag. You guys are experts at it, not because you've done, all sorts of academic training, but you've raised your own family as well. And so when we sometimes think of who are the experts, sometimes it's the ones who've successfully gotten through all of those turbulent years raising a family. So, we can put all ourselves in that boat of being on the rise and understanding the wisdom that comes from raising families. And it really is a getting of wisdom. Kate, this is something that every mother knows, every father does too, that all of the battles and the challenges you go through raising a family, this is something of the getting of wisdom, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Trial and error is a good one. Often we go in with a picture of what parenting is going to look like, and it doesn't necessarily turn out the way we think, especially when you've watched other people and you go, I'm going to do this, I'm not going to do that, I'm going to do this, and I'm not going to do that. And so you kind of make this mental list of how you're going to head in that direction. And it doesn't necessarily work that way. Funnily enough, our children all have different personalities and different temperaments. And so what we had in mind may not work.
And it's not just the good things that happen in raising our families that actually contributes to our wisdom. In fact, the bad things, perhaps navigating the pathway through those is the thing that really causes us to be ultra-wise. Your thoughts here, Brett? The wisdom that's gained from all of the difficulties as well as the good times.
Very much so. And in your opening remarks, you were talking about family of origin. And you may have been brought up in a family that had some dysfunction. And there are no perfect families. So we've got to just remind people there are no perfect families. But you might have seen or observed something that you said, I will never be like that. And then you could pendulum swing completely the other way and become, say, for example, you were brought up in a very authoritarian environment, but you said, I'll never be like that. And then you might become more permissive. So we do learn from it, but then we also have to be aware that just because it was one way doesn't mean everything was bad. We have to take on board some of the positive aspects that our families have had, and then we discern and we talk about leaving and cleaving, which we'll be discussing a little bit later on. But the fact is, when we join a family or start a family together as husband and wife, we bring our baggage. It's like a suitcase, if you like, and some of that suitcase has got lovely folds and it's all beautifully handled and you can put them all into your suitcase. And then there's some other things that are a bit bulky or a bit heavy, and we need to deal with those as we navigate our life together.
Kate, is there anything in yours and Brett's story personally around some of these things? Did you experience the baggage that came from your own experience under your own parents that, you bring to your relationship and things that you've had to work through? Just throwing you into the deep end here.
Oh, of course. That's totally fine. Yeah, of course. When we got married, there'd been quite a complicated situation from probably the age of 16, I guess it was. And that was really complex within our family situation. And it was a bit of a, hand grenade within our family. And so what didn't look like that anymore. And so when we got married, I had all sorts of hang-ups about that. I had gone for counselling before we got married to work through it. But when we got married, it kind of attached itself in some other way. But the thing is being really aware of those things. And so I did go and seek help, and I had a lot of prayer, and I was very aware of where it had come from. And I didn't want that to be part of our story, because the rest of my growing up years, for me, were amazing. So I had great parents, and I totally, totally admired my mum.
I guess you're talking, those latter teenage years, young adulthood. Sometimes we might reflect that young people feel like they know it all. But when you say, Kate, you even sought some counselling because you were confused about a whole bunch of stuff. Being aware of your own beliefs, of your own behaviours, your own reactions to things. Brett, how important is it? Maybe you need some sort of mentor or some counselling just to be able to give you the right context. But thinking you know it all, I'm sure that's not necessarily a good thing.
Yeah, we all have our blind spots. We refer to this very often in a marriage seminar, that your wife or your husband gets a front row seat to all of your flaws, and they can also be your number one cheerleader. And it's really good that you have a posture of that they can identify some of those blind spots. And it may be that we haven't addressed some of the issues that we've brought, that baggage that we've brought into our family of origin. And once we recognize that, it may be that our family of origin, we were brought up in a family that we didn't communicate very well, or we didn't handle conflict very well, or we weren't very demonstrative in our family. You didn't see mum and dad cuddling and kissing and hugging. They may have not done very well with their finances. There's a variety of different things that we have observed or experienced that actually shapes who we are. And if I would say to someone who says, and I make the mention, you're just like your father. And right then it can trigger, I am so pleased that you said that, because I want to be like my father. He was a good man. He was really faithful. He was honoring. But then on the flip side, it triggers something. I never wanted to be like my father because of that as experience. And so we need to recognize, and that self-awareness, and we often need other people to speak into our lives. And it's sort of like a baptism of fire when you go into marriage, because you bring that into the relationship. And then you go, oh my goodness, where did that come from? And there are some tools that we at Focus would like to be able to help people navigate to actually say, hey, that's the point of reference. That's the light bulb moment. And then when we recognize that, then we can deal with it, and then we can move forward in a God-honoring, healthy way.
Sometimes as Christians, when we're talking about parenting, we can sometimes assume we're only talking about nice families, doing little fine-tuning things to make sure your family is nice and you're going to flow on from that in niceness. But, as listeners to this program will know, and oftentimes we'll have guests on, and they're sharing the most horrendous, traumatic testimony of how their lives were shaped in their younger years. All of the issues around addiction and violence and sexual assault and all of those dreadful things that can shape us in awful ways. But sometimes we feel like, what's the way forward? Is there a place where if you have suffered very bad things, maybe even abuse under your own parents, things that have shaped you in a dreadful way, a need to be healed of those things
Yes.
from the past. Kate, when you're talking to people and they start to share some of these sorts of things, is there a place that you lead them to where they can experience healing? And I guess that comes into, bringing our spiritual Christian faith into there and God's present. But what do you do for people who've had really dreadful experiences?
Well, first of all, those people need to be heard. They need to be heard. You need to acknowledge what they've walked through. Some of them have never heard an apology. I would say most have not ever heard an apology for things that people have done to them. And so to acknowledge that and just witness the pain and suffering that was brought upon them. And that is huge. And, I'd feel that often we go, nobody can truly understand, but there are a lot of people who've walked through very, very difficult times. And, to bring people who've walked through things with the other person, because they can have the empathy. Often when you've walked through something similar, the empathy for that other person is extraordinary. Now, we don't like to see people sit in that. It's okay to be not okay, but it's not okay to stay there. Some people are still carrying the pain for 50, 60 years, but God doesn't want that. He wants us to be set free. He wants us to have a full life and freedom in Him.
And not everyone comes from that extreme dysfunction. And perhaps the majority of people who might be listening to a conversation with us today haven't come from that extreme dysfunction, but they're still intimately aware that the parenting style that they were brought up under creates all sorts of, baggage for us as we take those things into our relationships for the future. Back to you again, Kate, on this. Not everyone's extremely dysfunctional, no. But most of us, we still want to understand what our parenting style is going to do to our kids.
We do, that's for sure. And we like to encourage people to look for mentors. In fact, we prayed for our children to have mentors, men who were older than them, who'd walked a journey, who loved the Lord, and who could speak into their lives. Now, we actually prayed for 10 years for them to all have mentors, and it happened all in the 1 year. All of them got a mentor, and they were all different ages. One was 25, one was in his 70s, and one was in his 50s. And it was just an extraordinary journey for all of them under those mentors, because there needs to be an avenue where they can talk about what they are walking through without feeling like they're going to hurt their parents or whatever. And, Brett and I are not perfect. We had a very loving home, but your parenting will affect your children on some level because all of them are made up differently. We think to ourselves, we're going to do the same thing for every child. Well, that actually doesn't work, because their little natures are not wired that way. And so if what you do for one child who's quite a strong personality and, ready to go, and you can be quite firm and direct, if you do that on a very gentle child, you'll crush them. And so it's just managing and learning how your child is, how God made them, and not try and make them something they're not.
And we also have to acknowledge that the birth order has a big factor in that, because let's face it, many of your listeners, they were the firstborn. They were the guinea pigs in the family. Mum and dad are learning. They got the training wheels on, the L plates. And then the second one comes and they think they've got it, they've got it down pat. They've learned how to do it. And then the child's a completely different child. Then they have to go back to the learning. And then there's a third or a fourth. And so it's a constant learning of adapting and adjusting your parenting and seeking God's wisdom, and maybe through an individual, a mentor. But I often refer to, and everyone has heard of this, the African proverb, which says it takes a village to raise a child. And so we need the collective wisdom from others. And it may be the church, it could be the youth pastor, it could be the school chaplain, it could be the sporting coach, or it could be a family friend, that there's times when other people need to speak into your child's life. So we need to surround ourselves with people who have got the best interest of your child at hand.
I want to add in here too, is that in a family situation, So it's to be fun, firm, and fair. That's our 3 Fs for family life: fun, firm, and fair. One of the things that needs to happen is you need to have the same rules and the same consequences for all the children. It's just how you implement them. So it's fair because they're going to have the same consequences and they've got the same boundaries, but it's administered differently. So we had one son, which was all you had to say was, and he wouldn't do, whatever you didn't want him to do. Whereas the others, it was, do not touch that again. And so you had to be very firm. And so you have to apply the same rule, but according to the nature of your child.
Helping you make sense of life, culture, and current events from a biblical perspective. 2020 on Vision.
Our talkback line open, 1-800 316 316. I'd love you to join in our conversation today. Brett and Kate Ryan are our guests. They lead Focus on the Family. It is Families Week. Hey, Brett, you mentioned a little earlier in our conversation the order of birth matters. Matters to the kids or matters to the parents. The parents have had one child, they have a second. By the time you get to 3, you feel like you've done this and you're pretty confident with it. What does the birth order do to our parenting style?
Well, it's not hard and fast. It's not an exact science, but there are some traits that the first child has, and the second and third or subsequent children, you may have heard of the middle child syndrome. They feel like they don't know where they fit, and that can be a pattern of feeling like the eldest has got everything organized. They're usually very structured, very dependable, very reliable. They're usually high achievers. Their feelings of they're much more of a people pleaser. And then the third or subsequent children, they are the babies, and both Kate and I are the babies of our families, and it can be seen as they were the favorites. They got away with things. They got away with murder would be another expression that people have. They feel like that their style is that they're more fun loving. They're more extroverted. They love the attention. They're attention seeking. They can be seen as self-centered, but they have good social skills. So there's a variety. And then there's the middle that have a mixture of those. And we say this, that it's not hard and fast, but those patterns of behavior can impact your marriage, can impact the way that you parent your children, and it can actually just in life, how you see the world through that lens. And so, as I said, it's not an exact science, but it's very interesting to look and review that type of information.
Let's hear from a listener, and I've got a text here from Josh in Hobart, who says he's 10 metres up a dead gum tree right now. He's obviously got the phone there. Josh says, hi Neil and co. Question, Kate made the brilliant point that it's okay to not be okay, but it's not okay to dwell in not being okay. Can any of you point to a scriptural basis that has that wise contention? Any thoughts here? I'll come to you, Kate, about not being okay to be okay, or however that looked.
Well, I'm going to say a lot of the scriptures in Psalms will talk about, being in lament. And so they are walking through, David writes a lot about walking through journeys and sojourning. And I think one of the important things we need to remember is God talks a lot about walking through. We have to walk through. And he's promised to be there. When we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, they had to go through the Red Sea. But Jesus is going to be with us. He will not leave us nor forsake us. And so combining the lament ones and then further on where he talks about taking every thought into captivity and making them obedient to Christ. And so we can't keep dwelling on, the devil loves to keep us ineffective. And when we are dwelling on pain and chaos and fear are not of God. And so taking those thoughts into captivity and dealing with them and surrendering them. Now, it can be a process, as I said, walking through. So that might mean going for counselling, having prayer, having a mentor, having some good friends walking beside you. But he wants us to live in fullness. Jesus died on the cross for us that we may have life and have it abundantly. And so living out of pain all the time is not what he wants for you.
Some people, and maybe those who are in public life, like to make sure that their family looks wonderful, but under the surface, all sorts of things are going astray. Almost a mask that people can have on. Is it good? I mean, I'm sure there's going to be times when the mask is necessary, but times when you can let that mask down in order to receive some support, some emotional attention, some help here.
Yeah.
Brett?
It's interesting you should say that, because Kate just spoke to a girlfriend yesterday, I think you were mentioning, and she was making comments. She goes, I just love how you and Kate, or you and Brett, are so real, because when we speak, we talk about our warts and all, our problems or our challenges, or when we're just about to do some ministry, we might have some intense fellowship. And we bring that to actually make us feel more real, more vulnerable, and so people can relate to us. And I'm not talking about ourselves, but there is a time and place. We can't share all of our dirty laundry, so to speak, or all the skeletons, but we can share those things and we just seek God to actually ask him to guide us to say which of the stories that are going to resonate most with the people. And we've got plenty of examples, both the good and the ugly, that we can share in our own journey that can help people navigate some of those issues to say, hey, if they could get through that, then I can too.
I think it's very important to keep things private. There's a very big difference between being transparent and being secretive. And so we need to take that into account. When people don't share private things, it's probably because, first of all, it affects somebody else and they do not have permission to talk about that. And second of all, when you're actually walking through it, you need space to process. And so to splash that out there in public is just not wise. And so, yes, wisdom needs to be very much in the forefront. And as Brett says, praying about what can be brought to the forefront, because often it needs, let's say you're a pastor and you have an issue with something. Let's say it's pornography. That needs to be brought to the light to the eldership. Those kind of things need to be brought to the light. Now, does it need to be advertised to the whole church at that point? No. They need to work through it. They need to have counselling. They need to be directed. Now, it might mean that he needs to be stepped aside for a period of time, but not everybody needs to know the details.
But if once they've worked through their issues,
they can share
their victory. That they've walked, and as Kate says, walked through it and they've come through the other side. But when you're right in the middle of it, it's not the appropriate time to share that amount of information.
Because it can do damage to somebody else.
Brett and Kate, I think we should take a call. Let's hear from Alex in Melbourne. Hello, Alex. Welcome along. Thanks for waiting patiently.
Thank you, Neil, and hello to Brett and Kate. As far as that chap up the tree there, I don't know if he's still there, but anyway, there's a general understanding, not only for family, but for every believer, in Peter, 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 14, but if ye suffer for righteousness' sake, happy are ye. And okay, it's hard to be happy when you're suffering, but in Romans chapter 5, verse 1 to 5, it reads, therefore, being justified by faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ. We already know we have that peace, by whom also we have access to faith into this grace wherein we stand and rejoice in hope of the glory of God. And not only so, but we glory in tribulation, also knowing that tribulation worketh patience, and patience experience, and experience hope. And hope maketh not ashamed, because the love of God is shed abroad, which we come to understand being faithful in our own work. That's the main important.
Alex, you're raising some great scriptures there. Let's come to Kate. tribulation that brings patience. Sometimes we're not praying for that sort of patience that comes along with the tribulation, but what are your thoughts here? Alex is sharing some great scriptural wisdom.
Fantastic. And absolutely, praying for patience or praying for other things, let's face it, to learn those lessons, he allows things into our life. Now, very, very traumatic things. People stop and say, well, how did God allow that? And the point is our theology needs to be right on it. And one of the things is in the Bible, this is a sinful world. And so in the Bible, it very clearly says we will face trials, and it's heartbreaking. And I don't for 1 minute diminish anything that people are walking through, because people who have done things have been, riddled with sin, and so that that's the heart of man. To be quite honest, that's the heart of man. And unless we've been saved by grace, that is our heart. And so we just pray for healing and freedom in this, our beautiful Christ.
And I think I'd add, when we go through persecution, and as it says in Matthew, blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake. We don't often go, oh, I feel so blessed for going through this difficult situation. But we need to default that actually, as Kate says, it's not a surprise to God that we're going to go through these things, but he said he will be with us. He'll never leave us nor forsake us. And so we need to see that it is a blessing. We're going to learn from it, and when we look at it from all things work together for our good, for those who are called according to his purposes, it will work out good somewhere along the line, whether you can use it to help, and Kate mentioned this earlier about showing empathy to others, or to actually simply say, what can I learn? How can I become more Christ-like as a result of what I've gone through?
And I'm going to say this too, having walked through quite a few things across my life, I recognize now through all the years that God uses it to help other people. Once you've walked through the journey, you've walked with the Lord, he's done an amazing thing through it, and brought us to the other side. It is extraordinary to me how often he brings people who are now in that situation that I can walk alongside. And so his promise that he will use it for good. It doesn't say what you're going through is good. He said he will use it for our good.
Alex in Melbourne, anything further to add?
I know, that's a good sum up there. As long as we're faithful, and we can always look back and say, I see now, how God helps me. And that is a true faith of all God's word, that it will be fulfilled as he has written. Yeah.
Alex in Melbourne. Thanks, Alex. Thanks so much for your call. Our talkback line is open on 1-800-316-316. You can join into our conversation. Hey, while we're talking scriptures, and Alex had a bunch of those there, 1 John 4:19, we love because he first loved us. There has to be some parenting wisdom in being able to be a conduit for God's love into our own family situation. You've got Proverbs 22 verse 6, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he's old, he will not depart from it. I guess that's actually wisdom, not necessarily a promise, because I'm sure there's people who've said, oh, hang on a second, that's not watertight. Some stuff goes wrong there, but there's a rule of thumb, there's wisdom. What about Ephesians 6:4? Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. What about respect and honour? From Exodus 20 verse 12, honour your father and your mother, that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. And then patience and compassion from Ephesians 4:2. Be completely humble and gentle, be patient, bearing with one another in love. So, I'm just reflecting a whole bunch of scriptures there because we haven't got time to expound on all of them. But the wisdom that comes from understanding principles from Scripture, Brett, those sorts of things, these are priceless wisdom. This is not to be brushed aside, and it's not just something that's, a little bit eccentric. It's actually really, really good value, isn't it?
Absolutely. I love that one back from, in Ephesians where it says, fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath. There's sometimes that Kate sends me to my room. So
when the kids are younger.
So, because, I might have become angry. And we need to learn how to control our anger, for example. That's just one of many things, because we don't want to act out of our own frustration or things that have triggered us. We need to set the standard of when things upset us or trigger us, we need to de-escalate that, to regulate ourselves, and then we are able to approach it in a much more calm and rational way. We learn to respond rather than react. The scriptures talk about loving compassionately, and we also talk about how God first loved us, so enable us to love others. A husband to love his wife as Christ loved the church. Now, that's a high bar. How do we achieve that? We need to reflect upon how we show our unconditional love, or not necessarily our unconditional love, but our acts of service, to lay down our wants, our needs, and put our spouse before ourselves, because that's what Jesus did to us. He didn't come to be served, he came to serve.
Let me bring you back to, you were talking about birth order, and that was just before the news, and you can identify what maybe our children or what we were like, depending on which order we came. First child, eldest, or the youngest, different sort of ways that our personalities and that our characteristics are shaped. But let me ask you, and I'll come to you, Kate. If we feel like I'm the authoritative one, I'm the angry one, or maybe you're feeling like if you were the youngest, maybe you were, always the last in line. The idea of transformation, of change, if we feel like we're victimized into a particular birth order or all sorts of other things, there's a way out of that, isn't there? Isn't that what our Christian gospel is about, that we can change, that life can change and life can be better as we align with Christ?
Oh, absolutely. It's all about transformation. And so, hopefully we're going to become more like Christ. And so our character, everything is going to reflect him, more of him, less of us. And so across the years, if you've always felt a certain way, you don't need to feel that way anymore, because God can do a transformational work in us. If we don't see transformation, then have we truly surrendered our life to him? Because once we surrender our life to him, we're no longer our own. I mean, that's a big deal. And so we want to become more like him.
We're taking calls on 1800 316 316. Let's take another call. Nicolette is in Toowoomba in Queensland. Hi, Nicolette. Welcome along.
Good morning. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me.
What are your thoughts, Nicolette?
I have just been thinking about that's my daughter, family of origin that we've been talking about this morning. And I just want to ask a question about families, young families, because I'm 28, my husband's 30, and we were only saved a couple of years ago. So we weren't raised in a Christian home. So the way that we are parenting our children is going to be extremely different to the way that we were raised in a non-Christian home. And I think that's something that's been difficult in a way to navigate, because we don't know what it's like to be raised in a Christian home. And I was just wondering if there's any advice for how to go about that.
Let me come to Kate. Brett.
Well, Nicolette, thank you so much for calling. And it's fantastic that you have started your family and on a new page. It's like starting a clean slate. There are things in your family, because obviously you are attracted to one another, that draw you to your husband. And so your parents-in-law must have done some things right. There were some things that they did well. And we encourage couples to look at their family of origin, and we can actually provide all of the listeners a free resource called Understanding Your Family of Origin. And on part of that is a survey. And that survey can actually look about the things that you observed or experienced growing up, and you or your husband completed, and then you can actually say, there it is, and look upon starting afresh. You mentioned about leaving and cleaving before, Neil, is that we leave our family, our dynamics, our responsibilities from our parents and we start taking the responsibilities ourselves. We take the good and we actually ask our when we started our family, both just Kate and I, we actually said, what do we like about our spouse's family and what do we want to carry on? There are some things that we say, hey, we're not going to follow that any longer, but we are going to look at different things. Now, when it comes to you, Nicolette, you've got starting afresh from a faith foundation. Where do we start? Where do we learn? And then we need the collective wisdom from others, maybe from your church, people that you trust, people who you look up to, and learn from them. We learn from getting resources available, and we've got some resources at Focus on the Family Australia, but there's other resources that you can glean from, and listening to programs such as On Vision. All of that to say is that we can learn, and just because that was your history, your past does not determine your present or your future. You are starting afresh.
Nicolette, anything further to add from you?
Just a big thank you, and I love listening to Focus on the Family. There's been some wonderful, wonderful things that we've learned in the last few years from Vision and from Focus on the Family, and it's just such an honour to get to speak to you guys. So thank you.
Lovely.
Nicolette, before I let you go, how old are your little ones? So how many have you got?
So I've got Abby. She's 2 and a bit, and she's the one currently making noise at me because we're doing a Play-Doh David and Goliath type thing at the moment. And I am currently pregnant and due in July with our second baby.
Oh, yay.
Wonderful.
Congratulations. And
Thank you.
it is starting afresh between you and your husband, and there are no perfect parents. Just want to remind everyone, and Christians and non-Christians all make mistakes, but we have the availability of the collective wisdom from God to help us navigate some of the issues that we are going to be faced with. I'm just going to add here too, is making sure that you've got scripture in your heart, and then make God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit just a part of your family. It's not, he's not out there. He's just a part of your family, like walking along the street. Oh, look at that flower. Oh, I wonder what God was thinking when he made that. Perhaps he loves pink. So just things like that. So when you get to the big things later on in their teens, he's already there, a part of your family. You're not, as the kids used to say, Bible bashing them, because he's just a part of who you are.
Wonderful. Great to hear from you, Nicolette. Thank you so much for your call. Our talkback line is open on 1-800-316-316. You can join into our conversation today. It's interesting, isn't it, when we talk about families, and Nicolette's gone now, but she's got little ones. And sometimes we think about these biblical principles by which we want to raise our children. But when you're in the middle of it all, the fatigue on after those sleepless nights, and after the kids have just been having, a time where you've just been driven crazy, sometimes making application for those things is not easy. So these things are not necessarily emotionally driven. You have to actually make them a part of your life. Brent, if I was coming to you, making principles that we talk about as biblical principles for parenting, making those a part of who you are, how does that process work? Do you grow into that over time? Do you get mature? Do you leave some things behind? If we're trying to apply these things, how does it work?
That's assuming that you are mature. Exactly. I'm still a work in progress. But it's that having that attitude or a posture of lifelong learning, that you don't have to have it all together, because you will never have on this side of eternity, that we will have it all together. We are always going to grow. We're always going to desire to learn and to become more Christ-like. We are going to make mistakes. We are going to say things or do things that we would rather forget. And that especially comes with our parenting. But we have to be intentional. As Kate was saying, one of the things about loving your Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and strength, and having it in your own heart, and then you can impress it upon your children, where it says in Deuteronomy chapter 6, we have to live this out. And if our faith is genuine and it's real and it's transforming our lives, then our kids can pick that up and they have a front row seat to say, hey, this is making it for it's working for mum and dad. I want a part of that. And then they can own their faith themselves.
It becomes very attractional when they see it being role modelled and it is transformational. If it's not, they can smell a hypocrite a mile away.
Taking calls. In fact, we haven't got time to take a whole lot more. We'll squeeze in one more. Mick is in Buckerheads in New South Wales. Mick, need to be quick. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, Mum's my mother's a mother of 9, and she had a wooden spoon sitting up on the cupboard. So whenever anybody chucked a tantrum, not that we did, but when there was misbehaviour, she used it. And that doesn't happen today. Kids throw tantrums everywhere. Excuse me. And parents count 1 to 3 or whatever. But it's just that. And there are proverbs about all that as well. Spare the rod, spoil the child, all that sort of stuff. But they make a rod for their own back these days, and I'd be interested in the comments on that.
Mick, good comments there, because there's confusion around what disciplinary methods parents have today, what's acceptable, what's not. That's a whole big conversation to have on its own. But, if I come to you, Brett Ryan, when we're talking about discipline today, what are your thoughts? Biblical standards of discipline?
I appreciate Mick's comments, and we unfortunately live in a society where, corporal punishment or physical punishment is seen as a negative. And there are a lot of research papers that actually say it hasn't been successful. Now, many people say, well, it worked for me. Look at how I turned out. But overall, the research would actually say it's not as effective. There's other forms of discipline and boundaries. Now, it could be, we talk about time out, but it could also be time in, that you go alongside with your child to help them navigate their emotions or their feelings, to validate their experience. There could be that they're taken away a privilege. We have to recognize that every child's different, and what works with one child won't be necessarily effective. So there's a variety of different things, and I can't give a whole full answer to this, but the fact is there are many different ways more effective in the way that we communicate with our kids than just leaving it to a spoon. And it has to be done. Discipline is done for a child, not to a child. And we also have to recognize we should never do discipline in our anger, because then we will say or do something that we will later regret.
There's a mixed bag of resources that parents need to use for disciplining children. Mick in Buckerheads, thanks so much for your call. Have to draw a few things together here, and I think coming back to resources, you mentioned you have a fabulous resource around this whole topic of family of origin. In fact, Karen in Slacks Creek in Queensland, she's sent us a text saying, hey, what is some resources here on this whole topic? You mentioned understanding your family of origin. What sort of resource is that? When listeners go to families.org.au and they're going to get that resource, what's it going to help them with?
It's a free PDF download, and on that you can go to our website and just look up Family of Origin, and it'll be probably the first thing that comes up. And on those pages, it's about 11 or 12 pages worth. It's like an e-booklet. On the last page, there's actually a QR code that will allow you to do a survey, and that survey covers a lot of different areas. So that's our Family of Origin resource. But during National Families Week, we've got a video platform, a library of different resources on our FamilyCast platform, and they can go to familycast.com.au and they can register for free. And people love things for free, but there's things on marriage, there's things on parenting, there's things on apologetics, there's things on for kids, Adventures in Odyssey and radio theatre, and this has all been made available for Celebrate National Families Week. And we'd love to have as many people sign up to be able to gain access to. They can either use them in the privacy of their own home or in small groups within their church.
Well, write that down. Maybe you need some of these resources personally for you and your spouse. and your family, or maybe there's someone you know who could really benefit from having access to free resources that will help them to raise their family. So Understanding Family of Origin, a free resource when you go to families.org.au, and that website with a video library, familycast.com.au, and you can register there for free. Brett and Kate Ryan, they lead Focus on the Family in Australia. It's always such an enormous privilege to have you guys on. Thanks so much for, we give you a bit of a squeeze and all this wisdom comes out. Just absolutely fabulous. Thank you so much for sharing your hearts with listeners today on 2020.
It's our pleasure.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.